Hello everyone, and welcome to my YNR Official 24 channel. Jill Abbott never intended for the truth to come out like this. Not in a room filled with ghosts of old wars and simmering vendettas, but fate has never cared about intentions in Genoa City, and when she stands in the living room at the Abbott mansion clutching a sealed DNA envelope with trembling fingers, the air itself seems to crackle with danger as Jack watches her with growing suspicion. Victor Newman narrows his eyes with instinctive dread, and Kane Ashby, unaware his entire existence is about to be rewritten, paces near the fireplace thinking this is just another corporate ambush, unaware that Jill's next words will detonate decades of lies. Because when Jill finally blurts out that the DNA test doesn't just expose a secret affair but rewrites the Abbott-Newman rivalry at its core, the room erupts into disbelief as she reveals that Kane Ashby is not merely connected to the Abbott bloodline but is, in fact, Jack Abbott's biological son, conceived during a long-buried scandal that Jill swore she'd take to her grave. And the moment Victor hears Jack's name attached to Kane, something dark and furious ignites behind his eyes, because this isn't just a family revelation, it's a strategic nuclear strike that alters alliances, vendettas, and legacies, and Victor immediately realizes that Kane, whom he's manipulated, used, and underestimated for years, is now an Abbott heir with legitimate claim to power, money, and revenge, while Jack reels in horror and guilt as memories flood back of a reckless, alcohol-soaked night years ago when he believed Jill had been manipulating him yet again, never suspecting that a child would result, let alone one raised under another man's name, and as Jack stammers denials that quickly collapse under Jill's tearful confession and the cold certainty of the lab results, Kane's world fractures in real time. His anger spiraling between disbelief and betrayal as he demands to know why everyone he trusted lied to him, why Catherine Chancellor's whispered doubts suddenly make sense, and why his entire identity was built on a carefully curated illusion, while Victor, ever the chess master, instantly reframes the revelation as both a threat and an opportunity, recognizing that Kane being Jack's son gives the Abbotts a powerful new pawn but also exposes Jack to devastating emotional leverage. Because Victor knows that Jack's greatest weakness has always been family, and now that weakness has a name, a face, and a legal birthright, and as Victor steps forward with a slow, ominous clap that silences the room, he congratulates Jack with venomous sarcasm on discovering yet another long-lost heir, reminding everyone that secrets like this have a way of destroying empires, and Jill, sobbing now, insists she kept the truth hidden to protect Kane from becoming collateral damage in the Abbott-Newman war, but her words ring hollow as Kane explodes, accusing Jill of stealing his life, his choices, and his truth, while Jack reaches out only to have Kane shove him away, declaring that blood doesn't make a father and lies don't make a family, and yet even in his fury, Kane can't ignore the undeniable pull of shared mannerisms, mirrored instincts, and the chilling realization that everything he's ever fought for, power, respect, belonging, was encoded in his DNA all along, and Victor, watching the emotional chaos unfold, quietly plots his next move, because if Kane embraces his Abbott heritage, Victor could lose control over a key asset, but if Kane rejects Jack, Victor could weaponize that rejection into a blade sharp enough to cut the Abbott dynasty in half, and the fallout spreads like wildfire across Genoa City as Phyllis learns the truth and instantly panics, knowing that Kane's Abbott blood could shift corporate control at Abbott and threaten her own precarious position, while Ashley feels blindsided and betrayed, questioning how Jack could have kept something this monumental buried even from himself, and Billy, ever the volatile wildcard, sees Kane as both a rival and a brother, unsure whether to welcome him or destroy him before he destabilizes what little remains of Abbott unity, and meanwhile Kane's marriage, friendships, and loyalties begin to unravel as he replays every moment of his life through a new lens, realizing that Victor's manipulations were never random and that Jack's inexplicable interest in him over the years now feels disturbingly paternal, and as the story ripples outward, Lily struggles to understand who Kane really is, wondering whether the man she loved was real or merely a product of someone else's deception, and when Victor later corners Jill privately, his voice low and lethal, He makes it clear that this revelation doesn't end with truth. It begins with consequences, warning her that secrets like this don't just destroy families, they realign power. And as Jack attempts to reach Kane again with raw, unguarded emotion, admitting his failures, and begging for a chance to make things right, Kane stands at a crossroads that will define the future of Genoa City itself, torn between embracing the Abbott legacy that could finally give him the respect he's always craved or aligning with Victor to burn it all down in revenge. And as Victor watches Kane from afar with a calculating smile, he realizes that the greatest irony of all is that Jack Abbott's secret son may become the very weapon that finally brings Jack to his knees, proving once again that in Genoa City, DNA isn't just biology. It's destiny, power, and the most dangerous weapon of all. As the shockwaves of Jill's revelation continue to ripple through Genoa City, the initial chaos gives way to something far more dangerous. Calculated responses, hidden agendas, and emotional wounds festering into vendettas, as Kane retreats into isolation, locking himself away not just from Jack, but from everyone who ever claimed to know him, replaying every memory with a sickening clarity that exposes how often his instincts mirrored Jack's, how his hunger for approval echoed the Abbott legacy, and how Victor's influence now feels less like mentorship and more like grooming, while Jack, unraveling under the weight of guilt and disbelief, desperately seeks confirmation beyond Jill's words, ordering independent DNA tests, hiring private labs, and interrogating his own past until the truth becomes undeniable and inescapable, forcing him to confront the reality that he has unknowingly failed his own son for decades. And yet when the confirmation comes back airtight, Jack's devastation morphs into resolve as he vows to protect Kane at all costs, even if that means declaring war on Victor Newman in a way Genoa City has never seen, while Victor, sensing Jack's shift from shock to strategy, accelerates his own plans, quietly planting seeds of doubt in Kane's mind by reminding him how easily Jack accepted Jill's deception, how quickly the Abbotts moved to control rather than heal, and how blood ties have never stopped that family from destroying its own. And Kane, already raw and furious, begins to question whether this sudden outpouring of Abbott loyalty is genuine or merely opportunistic, especially as lawyers, board members, and executives start circling him like vultures, whispering about shares, succession, and legacy before he's even had time to breathe. And when Jill attempts to apologize again, confessing that Catherine Chancellor suspected the truth years ago and urged her to come clean, Kane explodes anew, accusing Jill of robbing him not just of Jack, but of Catherine too, stealing years of guidance and truth from the one woman who might have helped him understand who he really was. And as Kane storms out, Victor watches from the shadows with quiet satisfaction, knowing that chaos is fertile ground for influence, while Ashley and Tracy struggle to process the idea that Kane is family, torn between compassion and resentment, especially as Billy's jealousy and insecurity explode into reckless behavior, pushing him to confront Kane with accusations that he's an opportunist poised to steal what little stability the Abbotts have left, a confrontation that nearly turns violent before Jack intervenes, realizing too late that welcoming Kane into the Abbott fold won't be a gentle transition but a blood-soaked battle of egos, trauma, and unresolved pain. And as Phyllis scrambles behind the scenes to protect her position at Jabot, leaking selective information to destabilize Kane's credibility, Victor counters by leaking the truth to the press. First, spinning the narrative into a sensational scandal that paints Jack as negligent, Jill as manipulative, and Kane as a pawn caught between titans, igniting a media firestorm that forces Kane into the public eye whether he wants it or not. And with every headline screaming, Abbott heir exposed, Kane's resentment deepens as he realizes that even his pain has become currency. And when Lily confronts him, demanding honesty about where his loyalties lie, Kane can't answer, because he no longer knows whether loyalty is something inherited or earned. And as their relationship fractures under the weight of mistrust and shifting power dynamics, Victor seizes the moment to offer Kane something Jack never has: control on his own terms, proposing a strategic alliance that would place Kane at the head of a Newman-backed venture, independent of the Abbott shadow, framing it not as manipulation but as liberation. And though Kane initially resists, the idea burrows into his mind, especially after witnessing the Abbott board debate his worth like a commodity. And when Jack finally confesses everything, his regrets, his ignorance, his willingness to step aside if that's what Kane needs, the sincerity hits Kane harder than any lie ever could, leaving him torn between the rage that's fueled him and the undeniable truth that Jack never knowingly abandoned him. And yet, just as Kane begins to soften, Victor orchestrates one final push, revealing evidence that Jill altered timelines and documents to ensure Jack would never question Kane's parentage, suggesting that Jack subconsciously benefited from the lie by avoiding responsibility, a revelation that shatters Kane's fragile trust once more and reignites his fury. And when Kane publicly announces his resignation from any Abbott-related involvement, aligning instead with a mysterious new venture, Jack realizes too late that Victor has won the first round. As Genoa City braces for the inevitable corporate and emotional fallout, alliances fracture, secrets continue to surface, and the ultimate question looms larger than ever: whether Ashby will ultimately claim his place as an Abbott by blood, rejected entirely to forge his own ruthless legacy, or become the very force that finally destroys both dynasties from within, proving once again that in Genoa City, the truth doesn't set you free, it arms you for war. As Kane's stunning withdrawal from the Abbott orbit sends shockwaves through every boardroom and living room in Genoa City, the city itself seems to split along invisible fault lines, with loyalties hardening, tempers flaring, and old wounds ripping back open as Victor's shadow looms larger than ever. Because while Jack publicly maintains dignity and restraint, privately he is unraveling, haunted by the knowledge that every step Victor takes closer to Kane is a step Jack failed to take years ago. And when Jack finally confronts Victor at Newman Enterprises in a tense, closed-door showdown crackling with decades of hatred, Victor wastes no time twisting the knife, coolly reminding Jack that biology doesn't equal devotion and that Kane came to him willingly, not as a son seeking a father, but as a man seeking power. A reminder that sends Jack storming out with a vow that this war is no longer about business, but about saving his son's soul. Yet, even as Jack mobilizes his resources to counter Victor's influence, he underestimates how deeply Kane's resentment has metastasized, because Kane, now operating under the guise of independence, begins assembling a new power base that quietly siphons talent, investors, and proprietary information from both Abbott and Newman Enterprises, positioning himself not as a pawn of either dynasty, but as the architect of something far more dangerous: a third empire born from betrayal. And as whispers of Kane's covert moves reach Jill, guilt finally gives way to terror as she realizes the truth she unleashed has spiraled beyond anyone's control, prompting her to beg Jack to stop Kane before he destroys himself, while Jack, torn between authority and humility, struggles to decide whether stepping in will only push Kane further away. And meanwhile, Ashley uncovers evidence that Victor has been manipulating regulatory loopholes to give Kane's new venture an unfair advantage, igniting a bitter internal Abbott debate over whether exposing Victor's tactics will also expose Kane, forcing Jack to choose between protecting his son or protecting the company. And as Billy spirals into reckless sabotage attempts driven by jealousy and fear of replacement, his actions inadvertently leak sensitive information that Kane exploits ruthlessly, proving that he's inherited not just Abbott intelligence but Newman ruthlessness. A realization that horrifies Jack even as it fills Victor with dark pride, because Victor recognizes a reflection of himself in Kane's cold strategic calculus. And when Lily finally confronts Kane again, demanding to know whether his crusade is about justice or revenge, Kane admits that he no longer knows the difference, confessing that discovering Jack is his father didn't give him roots, it stripped them away, leaving him determined to build something no one can ever take from him again. And though Lily pleads with him to stop before he becomes the very man who used him, Kane refuses, convinced that power is the only language Genoa City understands. And as their relationship fractures completely, Kane's isolation deepens, making him increasingly reliant on Victor's counsel even as he insists he's not under Victor's control, a denial Victor encourages while subtly tightening the leash. And when Phyllis uncovers proof that Kane's venture is poised to trigger a hostile takeover that could devastate Abbott, she races to warn Jack. But Jack already knows, having sensed Cain's move weeks earlier. And instead of retaliating publicly, Jack makes a devastatingly personal play by inviting Cain to the Abbott mansion for a private dinner, stripping away lawyers, boards, and power plays in a raw attempt to reach him as a father. An encounter that begins stiff and guarded but slowly cracks open as Jack admits that the greatest regret of his life isn't losing companies or battles, but losing time with a son he never knew he had, a confession that nearly breaks Cain until Jack reveals one final truth Jill never told, that Jack once suspected Cain might be his, only to dismiss the idea out of fear that acknowledging it would destroy multiple lives, a fear that now seems tragically ironic, and as Cain absorbs this revelation, rage and grief collide inside him, forcing him to confront the possibility that everyone involved, including Jack, was operating from fear rather than malice. A realization that shakes his certainty just enough for Victor's grip to loosen, but before reconciliation can take hold, Victor strikes preemptively, leaking documents that implicate Jack in historical financial misconduct tied to Jill's deception, triggering investigations that threaten to dismantle the Abbott empire entirely. And when Cain realizes Victor used his pain as cover for a scorched earth attack on Jack, something in him finally snaps, because while he may hate the lies that shaped his life, he never intended to become the weapon that annihilated his own blood. And as Jack faces public humiliation and potential legal ruin, Cain is forced into an impossible choice: to continue his ascent and let Jack fall, proving Victor right that sentiment is weakness, or to sacrifice everything he's built to stop the destruction he helped unleash, a choice that will define not just his legacy, but the future balance of power in Genoa City. And as the city holds its breath, one truth becomes inescapably clear. The DNA bombshell wasn't the end of the story, it was the ignition point. And whether Cain ultimately redeems himself or completes his transformation into Genoa City's most dangerous new kingmaker will depend on whether blood proves stronger than betrayal, or whether destiny, once rewritten, can ever be undone. In the tense aftermath of Victor's calculated strikes and the Abbott empire teetering on the brink of collapse, Cain finally confronts the ultimate truth. He is no longer just Jack's son, no longer just a pawn in Victor's game, and no longer a man defined by other people's choices, because for the first time in his life, he has the power to decide who he will be and what legacy he will leave. And as he stares across the ruined boardroom at Jack, whose pride and guilt hang visibly like heavy armor, Cain realizes that reconciliation is not weakness, it is strategy, and that true strength comes not from revenge or manipulation but from the courage to redefine family and self on his own terms. And so in a moment that shocks even Victor, who had anticipated every move except the possibility of Cain choosing compassion over conquest, Cain steps forward to protect Jack, publicly refusing to let Victor's scheme destroy the Abbott name, a gesture that reverberates through the city, sending whispers, headlines, and murmurs of admiration through Genoa City society and corporate circles alike, while Victor, forced to recalculate, smirks privately, acknowledging the irony that the very son he groomed for power has refused to become his weapon, and in that refusal, Cain finally claims the moral and emotional victory that had eluded him his entire life, while Jack, moved beyond words, embraces Cain, finally able to call him son without hesitation. And as Jill watches, tears streaming freely for the first time, she realizes that while her secrets nearly tore the city apart, they also inadvertently forced the forging of a bond that is stronger than deceit, stronger than ambition, stronger than the lies that have defined Genoa City for generations. And as Cain begins the delicate work of mending relationships with Lily, with his friends,